Last year, the college football playoffs saw one Big 12 team in Arizona State. Will there be more this season? PHNX Sun Devils breaking it down on a trending edition. I'm Eric. That's Toe Tree. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. 5-star reviews if you're listening on audio go a long way. And we are still a long way away from the college football playoffs, but only about a month away from the season starting.
Let's
Toe
go.
Tree. I know. I don't think anybody on the planet is more excited than you.
Ready to go.
This Big 12 season is going to be fascinating because I think there are a lot of really good teams, but I don't know how many great teams there are. Obviously, you and I both think Arizona State going into the season is the favorite to win the Big 12. Is there another team, though, that we feel like might be good enough that even if they don't win a Big 12 championship, they can make the college football playoffs? Like, if you had to list the number of teams that you think have at least a shot to be playing in the CFP from the Big 12, what would that number be right now at the middle of July?
I would say 3. I would say Arizona State. We kind of talked about that on the show in previous weeks, that we feel like this is a really strong team, top to bottom. You keep all your assistant coaches, both your coordinators, you lock them up for the foreseeable future. You return 10 of 11 defensive starters on top of some depth guys. And then, of course, the cream of the crop at quarterback and Sam Leavitt, somebody that we expect to compete for a Heisman. And then Jordan Tyson, somebody that we, again, expect to compete for a national award in the Volitikoff and be potentially the first wide receiver off the board in the 2026 NFL draft. And then kind of beyond that, I think Texas Tech is an interesting team to follow. We just had them on one of our top 5 teams that really dominated the college football offseason. They return a quarterback. They added some key pieces offensively. Quentin Joyner, I think, is going to be a fascinating player in the backfield, the USC transfer. And then defensively, right? We know how much money they spent specifically on that front seven, on that defense. I think that is certainly a team that now has the pieces if they're able to actually put it together. And I think that's the big question, right? Is can they put it together both defensively and then offensively with a new offensive coordinator? If they are, I think they're certainly capable of making the CFP. And then maybe a little bit of a wild card team that I like fringe on would be Kansas State.
Okay.
I think Avery Johnson is one of the more talented quarterbacks in this conference, not named Sam Leavitt. Dual threat guy. I'd love to see him be a little bit more consistent with his arm this year. We know what he was capable of doing on the ground, but now you're missing your go-to back in DJ Giddens. You added some pieces as well. I think that defense should be slightly improved. So we'll see, but I think all 3 of those teams have CFP aspirations, and I think they all have the talent to be playing, late December, early January.
I think there are a couple more teams beyond that are also fringe wild cards. I don't disagree with your 3. So let's talk about that 3 for a second before we go to the wild cards. Which of those 3 do you think is good enough to not win the Big 12 and make it? Or is it like all 3 of them, it's you got to win the Big 12? Because then we're talking about, is there possibly 2 Big 12 teams in the college football playoffs?
Yeah, so I think when we just to have that conversation for the Big 12, I think it's immediately going to be difficult to get more than 100%, team in, right? I think the ACC was a unique example last year where they were able to get 2 teams in, SMU and Clemson. SMU had a really great season, and Clemson ultimately ended up winning the ACC championship game. So I think you almost need to have that kind of situation happen where a team is like so dominant during the actual regular season, but somehow they end up losing the Big 12 championship game the way that SMU did, but still were able to get
lose it in close fashion.
Exactly, right? I think they lost that game.
I think it was like a last second field goal by Clemson.
That I think is going to have to be the case for the Big 12 this season. I think if there's a team that is going to get it off merit but losing the Big 12 championship, we're probably talking about a team in I would say Texas Tech and Arizona State. I think if Kansas State were to get to the Big 12 championship game, I'm thinking maybe like a 10-2 or a 9-3 season.
I think you got to be at least, if from this conference, I think you got to have 10 wins.
I think this conference is going to tear itself apart,
and it's the Pac-12ification of the Big 12.
100%.
It is, and I think that's why it's going to be hard to see somebody make it in there that's not the Big 12 champion. But B, I think you got to have at least 10 wins.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to overcome like the SEC bias,
which
the
the
Big
SEC
10
will
bias,
get more teams this year.
100% because they changed the format.
Well, they didn't necessarily. So the auto bids aren't like They changed the seeding of it all, I believe. So like the top 4 teams that get buys are going to be the teams that are ranked 1 through 4.
They're not going to be the conference
Then
winners.
it's going to be like the conference champs are still going to get like automatic bids. They just won't be 1 through 4 necessarily.
Which means last year Arizona State would have been the last team in. I think they were 12th.
Yes, I believe they would have been 12th
instead
of
being 4th. If the seeding would change,
yeah, 100%. So you'll get your auto bid teams, but I think the SEC is definitely more top heavy this year than they were last year. I think the Big Ten maybe takes a little bit of a dip. That's a team that got a bunch of teams in last year: Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. So I'm really interested to see kind of the potential bias that's favored to some of these other conferences. Mm-hmm. But I do think, to kind of echo what Brett Yormark had said at Big 12 Media Day, like, this is the most competitive conference that you are going to get in college football this year. It's definitely the best quarterback conference, which I think is going to play a role in how national media views these teams, especially late in the season. Whereas you look at teams in the SEC, Big Ten that maybe just have better overall rosters, people want to watch great quarterbacks play late in December and early January, especially if they're 10-win teams. If we're talking about a team in Arizona State that has a Heisman finalist in Sam Levitt and a guy in Jordan Tyson that puts up 1,500 receiving yards, and they're a 10-win team, but they lose the Big 12 championship on like a last-second field goal the way that SMU did, I think Arizona State belongs in the college football playoff. And now, obviously, that's just kind of a blanket statement. Things we'll see how they play out. But the same kind of goes for a team in Texas Tech, right? A team that, I don't know if there's a program that has gotten more hype than Texas Tech, especially in the Big 12 over the last 6 months with what they've done to their roster. They return a quarterback. It's certainly going to be interesting to follow. But I would say if there were 2 teams in the Big 12 that weren't to win the Big 12 championship game, which ones would make the college football playoff or have a better argument, I would say Arizona State and Texas Tech.
Iowa State missing from that conversation of your top 3. And I think you look back to last season, and I know obviously their quarterback situation is a big question mark, especially going off of what you just said and why that might implicate themselves as far as college football playoffs go. But a lot of people were banging on the table for BYU to make the college football playoffs last year, despite not even making the Big 12 championship. Where do you see an Iowa State or maybe a Baylor, or let's say BYU finds at least like an at-level replacement for Jake Retzlaff, who I think was a good quarterback, but not like a world-beating quarterback, and I think a lot of his success was based off of the team around him. Where would you then put the next tier of teams? Is it those 3? Is it Iowa State, Baylor, BYU? Is TCU a wild card in there with Josh Hoover? Where do they all fall?
Yeah, so I mean, just to start with the whole BYU situation, you lose Jake Retzlaff, now reportedly set to be a walk-on at Tulane. We'll probably end up being the starting quarterback by the time it's all said and done. But I think there were a lot of people confident in BYU going into this season because Jake Retzlaff was coming back. That defense lost a lot of pieces of a really good defense. And we like Kalani Sitake as a head coach. I think that's going to be a solid program for years to come. I think with Retzlaff leaving, that team is no longer in a conversation of like the great or good category. I think that is definitely an average team right now in the conference. So I don't see BYU. I don't really see a path for BYU to be ultra competitive the way they were last year, because you don't have that elite level quarterback the way some of these other teams do in this conference. As it relates to Iowa State, I think Iowa State is in the good category, not the great category, right? You lose 2,000-yard wide receivers in Noel and Higgins, right, going on to the NFL. Yes, you bring in Chase Sewell, but overall, I think that offense got slightly worse, right? I think defensively, they're still going to be a really talented team. I like that secondary that they still have, returning some pieces from last year. But I think ultimately, like, that offense is going to have to turn it up even more than maybe they did last season, right? Because everybody around them got better. ASU, in theory, got better. TCU, in theory, got better. Like, all of these other teams that now have really good quarterbacks, they upgraded their offense in a way. Now, you can make arguments that, ASU lost Scadaboo. Well, guess what? Everybody in the conference lost their running back. It's really what did they do to replace that? And then other positions around it. I feel like Iowa State didn't necessarily upgrade at a ton of positions offensively. That's why I have them in the good category. I think if they're going to make the playoff, they need to win the conference. Baylor is a team that I think is again,
it's like the sweetheart of the offseason.
I hate to use the word fascinating again, but they are such a fascinating team, right? Because Sawyer Robertson wasn't even supposed to be the starting quarterback going into last season. It was supposed to be DeQuan Finn, who transferred from Toledo. But Sawyer Robertson ultimately had a really, really strong season. Dave Aranda, I mean, talk about getting off the hot seat, right? Like
from hot to cold.
They had a great end of the season, and there is a lot of hype around that team. But how much of that is really based on, okay, Sawyer, everything we saw from you last season, we're going to need more of that times 2, right? Especially to compete in this conference. He's going to have a full season of starting under his belt now, or at least going into this season. I think Baylor needs to have an ASU type of season from last year, where you can lose a game, you can lose maybe 2 games, but
losing to good teams like ASU, the first game of conference play.
You got to lose to good teams. They got to be tight margins. And ultimately, what propelled ASU down the stretch was those last 4 or 5 games where it's like, okay, we're fully taking care of business against really good teams on the road, at home. It doesn't matter. I think Baylor can be a 10-win team and still not make the playoff. I think that's another team that's not in the great category. They're in the good category, and they need a Big 12 championship to be in the CFP. And TCU, like to your point, like they've got a guy in Josh Hoover. They're like, of all the teams in this conference, they're the biggest wild card to me. Like they could be a 10-win team. They could also be a 5-win team, to be completely frank with you. So much of that is going to be based off of what Josh Hoover and this offense do this year. We know TCU loves to air it out. It's what they've been doing for the last several seasons. Heck, it got them to a college football, it got them to a national championship appearance against Georgia just a few years back.
Which went swimmingly, by the way.
Yeah, I think TCU can certainly be a team that we're talking about like week 9, week 10, week 11 being like, oh, like TCU's here.
They're one of the top teams.
They're going to be
conference.
A team in the college football playoff potentially. They're going to be in the Big 12 championship game. However, they're similar to an Iowa State and a Baylor, where I think just based off of where they are going to start the season in the preseason top 25, if they're even there, they're going to need a Big 12 championship to really seal their fate for a CFP appearance.
For me, every team we've talked about today is going to need a championship. I personally don't think more than one team from the Big 12 makes the college football playoffs. When you look at the conference, and you always have to factor in the fact that a lot of these teams are going to lose. Like, the only reason why ASU got into the Big 12 championship is because BYU fell apart and Kansas went on a run at the end of the season after being terrible at the beginning of the season.
ASU took care of their own business, but they needed help.
But they couldn't have gotten there if the rest of the conference didn't cannibalize itself through the last 4 or 5 weeks as well. What about you, though? If you had to put your money on it, how many teams from the Big 12 will be in that college football playoffs when it's all said and done?
My heart tells me 2, my head tells me 1, right? I think the only way...
What does your liver tell you?
1.5.
Kidney?
Kidneys tell me 1.5.
Okay.
I think if we're like being real about this, based off of what I said earlier, that the SEC is going to have better overall teams, right? You're going to have teams like a Texas, a Georgia, a Bama's looking to get back. You're going to have an Ole Miss that reloaded. You're going to have a team in South Carolina that we both feel is really, really good. LSU, right? We're talking about 6 teams right there in the SEC that are going to be really, really hungry to get to the college
legit
football playoff.
Contenders to where if they're on the fringe,
Absolutely.
and if it's LSU or TCU,
They're
if it's
taking
LSU or Texas Tech,
if
it's
they're
LSU
taking the
or
purple
ASU,
from Baton Rouge.
they're taking LSU.
100%, right? So we talk about how many teams in the SEC. You look to the Big Ten, Penn State returned talent, Ohio State returned talent. Oregon's going to get a lot of love because of Dan Lanning and what this team did last year. That's 9 teams that we just talked about. And like, you're going to get a non-Power 5 team that wins outright, right? You're probably going to get like a Boise State again. And then you're going to get an ACC champion, and you're going to get a Big 12 champion. So do we think that one of these other teams in the Big 12 has a monstrous season the way that SMU did, but loses the championship game? Because that's the only way that I really see 2 teams getting in. Again, my heart tells me that 2 sneak in, that the bias isn't going to be too strong in 2025. My head tells me we're likely going to see 1, and it's going to be whoever takes home the trophy in Dallas.
Well, that's what we think. What does your head or liver or kidney or gallbladder think about how many Big 12 teams make it to the college football playoffs? Drop how many teams and who you think it is down in the comments below. If you're listening on audio, just scream it out loud. I'm sure everybody around you would really appreciate it. If you're listening to this while you're running, keep going.
Yeah, don't stop.
Pushing. Don't stop. Also, rate 5-star reviews. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. As the ASU and the college football season approaches, just a reminder that nobody's covering ASU like PHNX Sun Devils. And, of course, we'll keep you up to date with everything going on in the Big 12 and in the world of the college football playoffs and what we're doing leading up to that all right here on PHNX Sports. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. And we will talk to you again very soon.